Okay, this should get the bow to move forward as we draw it back. Okay. Hi, my name is Connor, and for the past 10 months, I've been making a hardcore movement FPS. As of now, I've only ever made firearms for my game, but I'd really like to add a bow and eventually some melee weapons. But to understand why this is going to be hard, we first need to look at my game's current weapon structure. I have a base firearm with a bunch of parameters and behavior that I can have other weapons inherit. In other words, rather than needing to code each weapon from scratch, there's one set of logic that every weapon in the game follows, with slight deviations, like to the damage, rate of fire, or max ammo, for example. The code is a little complicated and pretty messy, but basically, when the player presses the fire button, the gun will be told to start shooting, and when the player releases the fire button, the gun will be told to stop shooting. The gun will also make sure to automatically stop shooting if it runs out of ammo, and if the gun is semi-auto, it will automatically stop firing after the first shot. But bows work in a very different way. Again, it is a little more complicated than this. Basically, when the player presses the fire button, the bow should draw back, and when the player releases the fire button, the bow should release the arrow. There are a bunch more differences, like how bows don't run out of ammo, but we'll get into that later. Okay, so step one, let's just copy paste this gun and change the graphics to be that of a bow. But, why aren't the graphics changing? Wait, why is the field empty? Okay, I definitely have the right mesh selected. Well, this is a great start. Okay, it's working now, but if we play the game like this, the bow just acts like a firearm. Okay, first let's just override the fire and stop fire events to basically make the gun do nothing for now. I'll explain this in more detail soon. Then let's grab the idle animation and drawback animation and just have it use the draw animation when we press the fire button and the idle animation when we release the fire button. Easy. Okay, this should be easy. Literally, just like how we learned to attach swords to hands in the beginner tutorials, we should be able to just attach the arrow to the bow string. Okay, the arrow's attached, just not oriented properly. If we tell it to keep its default position relative to the world, it should work. Why no work? Okay, never mind. We're not going to do it like that. The bow animation doesn't even go far enough back to make the arrow really look like it's being drawn. So instead, let's record the time that the player presses the fire button and use that to figure out how far back the arrow should be. Wait, hold on. Okay, I realized I didn't include a proper code breakdown, and that's like usually my favorite part. So let's do that right now. All right, we're going to start over here. So again, this thing is the event we overrid earlier. So again, this just happens every time we press down on our fire button. This gets the amount of seconds that have passed since we pressed play, so if we've been playing the game for 50 seconds, then this is 50. And then this just stores that number. Whatever number this is, this stores it so that we can use it later. If we go back here, this is all stuff to set the arrow's location. So if we start here, this chunk of code calculates the amount of time that has passed since we last pressed the fire button by subtracting the current time by the time where we press the fire button. So if, 60 seconds has gone by and we press the button when 30 seconds has gone by, then 50 minus 30 is 20. So we pressed the fire button 20 seconds ago. We can just ignore this for now, and we'll move on to the clamp. So the clamp takes whatever value we get into here. If we plug it into the clamp makes sure that it will never be something smaller than 0 or bigger than 1. I just personally find this makes the math a little bit easier to understand. Okay, this is to create a linear function. So we first multiply the number we get by -24 and then add 9 to it to basically turn this number that goes from 0 to 1 into a number that'll go from 9 to -15. And I'll put like a graph on the screen to explain that. And so with this setup, after a second of having pressed the fire button, this number will go from 9 to -15. So if we press the fire button at 29 seconds, and right now it's 30 seconds, then it'll do 30 minus 29, so we end up with 1 second. And then we put that into a clamp that makes sure it's not anything smaller than 0 or bigger than 1, and so in this case it's at 1, so that's fine. And then we multiply it by -24, so 1 times -24 is -24. And then we add 9 to it, bringing us to -15. And then this number, we just plug it into the x value of the arrow's location. I've kept the y and z values as constants because those don't change. I only want the x location to change. I only want the arrow to go forward and backwards. So the y and the z stay constants. This x gets calculated through, again, getting the amount of time that has passed since we pressed down on the fire button, making sure that number is within 0 and 1, and then plugging it into a linear function, and then we can plug that to the z. And finally actually set the arrow's location. And then back to this number, this thing just divides all of this code by 0.2, and it would be the same thing as just multiplying it by 5. It's actually usually multiplies it better, so let's just do it that way. So now, whereas before it would take 1 whole second to get to that -15 number, now it'll take 1/5 that amount of time. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now let's actually have the bow spawn a projectile when we release the fire button. Okay, so as I said, this bow already has code for firing a projectile. It's just that, by default, this code is executed whenever we press the fire button, whereas we actually want it to spawn a projectile when we release the fire button. So let's just take this parent fire node and place it after the stop firing node. This tells the game that when we usually fire, we should actually do nothing, but when we usually stop firing, that's when we need to spawn our projectile. Now when we play, we see that the bow is actually starting to come together. There's still one big problem though. The bow eventually runs out of ammo and needs to reload. So let's just set the bow's max ammo to 1 and have the bow reset the current ammo and mag to 1 every time we fire. You may have noticed it looks like the arrow just stops at the end of the bow and never actually flies off. We are spawning in a projectile, but it's really small, moves way too fast, and spawns right in the center of the screen rather than at the bow. So just like with the bow, let's create a new projectile type. Give it a new mesh. Give it a new mesh. Dude! Create a new projectile, give it a new mesh, slow it down, and finally implement some code to get it to snap to the bow's arrow's location as it spawns in. We still actually do the collision checks from the camera's center. It's only the location of the mesh or graphics that's been changed. Right now, the arrow always spawns with the same velocity and deals the same damage, but we want it to deal more damage and shoot faster as the bow gets more drawn back. So just like how we could figure out the arrow's location based off of the last time we pressed the fire button, we can do the same to figure out the arrow's damage and starting velocity. Okay, I got 3 sound effects from a free SFX website thingy, a whoosh, an arrow release, and a draw sound. I loaded them into Audacity, cut out their beginning silence, and exported them as .waves. Then just had Unreal play the draw sound when we press the fire button, and release sound when we release the fire button. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Looking back, I think it might have looked like it actually wasn't that hard. Oh, this actually took me a whole Saturday. There's a lot of tedious stuff I had to do that just wasn't really worth mentioning. So yeah, maybe support me by wishlisting my game or dropping a like, maybe.